Good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining today's session. We're just going to do a little bit of a minute or two of introduction and just a bit of housekeeping, just as people enter the webinar. And obviously, sometimes people just take a minute or two just to log on. So just a quick introduction, really. Welcome to today's session on energy procurement for schools and trusts. My name is Rob Gould from Barker. Really pleased to be joined today by Gavin Owen from West Mercia Energy, and we'll introduce him in a little bit more detail shortly, and he can run through a little bit to the background to WME and what they're doing with schools in this space. But just wanted to quickly introduce today's session, and in terms of some housekeeping, we're going to run today's session for hopefully we'll keep well within the hour. We might maybe slightly quicker if possible. But we're going to do a quick introduction from myself just to talk about the context of the challenge. Gavin's then going to do a little bit of a presentation on energy procurement strategies for schools, what they're doing and how that's linking into the wider conversation around energy efficiency and sustainability, decarbonisation and net zero. And then I'm going to sort of wrap up at the end with how the energy procurement piece fits into our wider sustainability strategy, and talk a little bit about things like climate action planning and those sorts of things, and how we can support with that. We are recording today's session, so we'll send out a recording, and also the slides from the session will be available to everyone at the end of the session, and they'll be emailed out to everybody. And if you've got any questions for either myself or for Gavin during the session today, then please put them in the chat. If they're just sort of coming to mind during the session. And then what we'll do is we'll also take a couple of pauses in between the main sections of the webinar. And if you would like to ask your question in person, that would be fantastic. We love to hear your voices, and we can unmute you and allow you to answer your question. So if you have a question and you'd rather ask it, just put your hand up and we can facilitate that. Mine and Gavin's contact details are also on the presentation notes, and if there's anything specific to your trust that you think I would really like to have a conversation, obviously you can reach out to us directly afterwards, and we'd be either of us be very pleased to speak to you directly. So I think we're sort of 3 minutes past. Hopefully most people are in the session now, and we shall crack on with the main content. So we know, as a driver, we're on as this chap Antonio Gutierrez from the UN saying we're on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. We know there's a massive drive to decarbonise, to become more energy efficient, but also the activities of the past few years have really crystallised the volatility of the energy market and how that can impact our school finances. So we know that whether we're looking at this from a cost, or from a risk management point of view, or from a carbon reduction point of view, there's a huge necessity for us to be looking at decarbonising our schools, and energy efficiency is hugely important. We know that, having talked to lots of schools and trusts up and down the country, that quite often there's confusion as to what to do next, what to do as a priority, and there's never enough time and money to do what we want to do on our sustainability journey. So hopefully the aim of today's session is to help to remove some of those barriers in terms of clarifying what you can do, what are some of the quick wins, what are some of the areas that can actually save you money rather than costing you money, and then how you could potentially use some of those savings to maybe be a catalyst to other energy efficiency measures within your trust. So quite often like to start this sort of presentation with this slide about why we want a sustainability strategy, why climate action planning is so important for our schools and our trusts. And the important thing really to recognise here is that everyone in your trust will have different drivers. I'm imagining that a lot of people on the call today are related to energy and procurement and finance and operations. So I think those money saving and risk reduction drivers are going to be very important for you. But also what's important to recognise is that that won't necessarily be the same for the rest of your organisation. So as we widen out the conversation into wider sustainability, it's looking at how the teachers, the students, the wider community are looking at this journey at the same time. So that if we're looking at energy procurement as part of a wider strategy, how do we feed that in to make sure that everyone is engaged? Because ultimately you'll only ever get to that our objective of net zero if we can get the whole organisation engaged. But we're obviously going to today focus very much on the energy procurement and data side of things. So just a quick introduction in case you're not aware of Barker Associates. Hopefully you are. We're multidisciplinary property consultants that work mainly in the education space. So we do all of the standard property consultancy of surveying and asset management, project design and project management. And we give a lot of advice to schools on funding applications, whether it's through kind of condition and capital funding, through things like condition improvement fund and school condition allocations and all that sort of thing. But specifically, a big focus of our work is been on helping the education sector to go on this decarbonisation journey. And we're working with all of the major sector bodies like CST and ASCL and ISBOR and the Trust Network, as well as the DFE on their current Net Zero Accelerator programme, to look at ways that we can scale this up more rapidly across the whole country. So before I sort of hand over to Gavin, just wanted to flag up, if you're not aware already, which I'm sure many of you are, about the DFE's objective for all schools and trusts to have climate action plans in place by 2025, which we are now in, and for all schools to have a sustainability lead. So climate action plans have these 4 themes within them. There's not a standard format for a climate action plan, but these 4 themes are the critical ones. And today we're obviously going to be focusing very much on the decarbonisation element of that and looking at how your energy procurement strategy can support the decarbonisation of your school more widely. If you are interested in the other areas, there's a lot of work we do with other partners such as Let's Go Zero and Eco Schools and the Count Your Carbon tools and those sorts of things that can be very useful for the wider areas of sustainability. And we do have a sustainability self-assessment and template climate action plan on our website that you can download. But if we focus very much on energy and on decarbonisation, this is the 4-step process that we go through with most of our clients, and it's looking at how you can decarbonise through buying your energy in a smart way. That's what we're going to focus on today. We then move on to how you can use less energy through both behavioural change, through optimising current systems such as control systems, building management systems, simple behavioural change such as switching stuff off, and through the implementation of capital projects such as LED lighting and the like. We then can look at the possibilities for generation, self-generation, which for schools generally means solar panels. And then the final piece of the jigsaw is to pull all that together and integrate it into your overall sustainability plan and wrap your energy strategy into the wider sustainability focused around waste and travel and water and all those other things that we can spend a whole other webinar on alone. But hopefully that sets the scene. And what it really does show is that this buying smart, buying your energy, buying your energy with a trusted partner that's going to go with you on this journey is absolutely critical. And that's why we've been working very closely with Gavin and his team at West Mercia Energy, because as he'll explain, it's really important that you not only get best value out of your energy contracts and good service, but also that you're working with a partner that is very much on your side when it comes to this longer term journey of supporting you through decarbonisation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Gavin, who's going to go through his presentation and introduce himself in a bit more detail. Thanks very much, Gavin.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob, and good morning, everybody. My name is Gavin. I'm Head of Business Development at West Mercia Energy, and we are first and foremost an energy procurement organisation who specialise in purchasing energy for the public sector. So hopefully we are well placed to take you through this. So Rob's just presented a 4-step plan, and that is how we recommend that you approach your energy procurement. And through this session, we're going to take you through these 4 steps. So ultimately, when it comes to this, it's about understanding the options that are out there and picking something that is suitable for you and for your school and for your trust and suits your risk appetite, suits your priorities, potentially suits the staff that you've got. Have you got big estates teams, or do you need support? So the 4 steps that we'll go through is how to choose your procurement strategy, and the key step of that is understanding the different ways that there are that you can procure energy. Choosing your service level. Again, do you know that there are different service levels out there, and if not, what are they? Deciding on your route to market, so compliance is important. And then the final one, once you've sorted number 1, 2, and 3, how you actually go about choosing a trusted provider. So very, very briefly, by the way of who we are and why we feel that we're qualified to talk on the topic. So West Mercia Energy is a public buying organisation. We currently procure energy for roughly 3,000 schools across England, but also for local authorities, town district councils, blue light, etc. And we've been doing that for over 30 years now. As a public buying organisation, we are wholly publicly owned, and by the 4 local authorities on the left-hand side there, and we only trade and only procure energy for the public sector. We're also one of only a handful of the DFE approved energy framework providers out there in the market. So hopefully well qualified to take you through this. So we'll talk about those 4 things that we've discussed initially, and then we'll talk a little bit about the importance of data when it comes to actually managing your energy consumption, and ultimately trying to get you to, where possible, reduce it. Because whether you want to reduce your consumption to save the planet, or whether you want to do it to save some money, ultimately the net effect is the same. So that's a really, really important thing currently. So step 1, choosing your energy procurement strategy. So essentially, there are 2 ways that you can purchase energy. There is fixed price procurement, and then there is flexible procurement. And there are slight nuances. There are slightly different versions of both. So we're going to start off looking at fixed price procurement. And essentially this means that you go to the market on a given day of the year and you lock in your energy for a period of time, usually between 1 and 3 years. There are people out there that would try and push you into 5 years. But again, this comes back to what suits your priority. So I've got some kind of bullet points on the left-hand side there that highlight some of the positives, and then in the red text, some of the negatives, albeit I think with a number of these, they could easily be classed as positives or negatives. So what happens is you go to the market and you lock that energy down for a period of time. And on the right-hand side there, I've got a chart which is completely fictitious, but it tries to show the difference between a fixed price strategy versus a flexible strategy. And if you imagine that the market is reflected there by that blue line, is very, very volatile. It's significantly more volatile now than it was, say, 3 years ago. And with fixed price, you are somewhat throwing a dart, and that's reflected there by those red dots. And you may get lucky and you may hit the bottom of one of those spikes, and that's great, happy days. You may unfortunately get unlucky and hit the top of one of those spikes. And you will all recall the energy price crisis a few years ago, and some of you may have experienced this, the horror stories of those experiencing 600, 700, 800% increases in energy prices were unfortunately people that were on fixed term, fixed price contracts that were taken at a good time, somewhere near the bottom of one of those spikes. But unfortunately, those contracts ended at the top of a spike, and in those instances, unfortunately, you've got nowhere to go. We'll talk about flexible procurement on the next slide, but what that tries to do is smooth out some of those peaks and troughs. So you might not be right at the bottom of the market, but you certainly avoid being right at the top. So some of the key benefits of fixed procurement is it does give long-term budget certainty. So if you as a school or as a trust, your absolute priority is to know what you're going to be paying for your energy for the next 3 years, then there is no other way of doing it other than fixed term, fixed price. But you have to be aware that you may well be looking out at the top of one of those spikes, and in years 2 and 3, You may be paying more for energy than anybody else in your area. On the contrary, you could be paying the least. But if your absolute priority is that long-term budget certainty, this is the way to achieve it. Fixed price is simple to understand and it's simple to make comparisons. So if you have to get 3 quotes, if that is in your procurement standing orders, then this is a very simple way of doing it and comparing them, being able to compare 3 supplier prices. I caveat that if you go to market on a poor day at the top of one of these spikes, even though you're getting 3 prices, you will have 3 poor prices. And generally people do this between 1 and 3 years. In terms of, I've got their fully fixed versus fixed pass-through. So there are ways of doing this whereby you just lock in the energy price. So you may or may not be aware, but for electricity, for example, between 60 and 65% of the total energy that your total energy invoice is actually related to non-energy costs. So government taxes, levies, costs of running, maintaining the grid, etc. So there are slightly different versions of fixed where you lock in the energy price and the non-energy price. So that's what we refer to as fully fixed. Or you can have fixed pass-through where you lock in the energy and the non-energy is passed through. So that doesn't quite give you the budget certainty, but if suppliers build in a little bit of risk on their non-energy costs, it is a way of potentially avoiding that. So again, it comes back to what your priorities are. On the negative, so onto the red text, your final price, as I mentioned, is dependent on one single purchasing decision. And if that is a bad time, then you are stuck with it. I've touched on the non-commodities potentially having additional risk built in if you are to lock them down for, say, 3 years in advance. So the suppliers might not know what the non-energy costs will be for years 2 and 3. So they'll take a punt and then they'll put some risk on top to cover that off. And possibly one of the biggest ones is, you are subject to market volatility if the contract ends at a point when the market is high. So hopefully that makes that one clear. So the other version, and full transparency, this is the one that West Mercia Energy as an organisation recommend, and of our 3,000 or so schools that we work with, almost every single one of them opts for fully flexible procurement, which is generally deemed as a lower risk approach. And essentially what it means is instead of going to the market and buying everything on one day, we actually do the opposite. So we purchase small chunks of energy over a much longer period of time. So how we do that is we would take your volumes, and with respect, as a school or a trust on your own, you would likely be too small to do this. So you can work with a partner to support it. So we take your volumes and we put them into a much bigger trading basket. And then there is a risk managed energy procurement strategy delivered by experienced traders that purchase small amounts of energy over a longer period of time. And the idea there is that you're smoothing out those spikes in the market. You're trying to cut that out, and potentially buy smaller amounts when the market is going down, to follow the market down. And then in a rising market, that can work out as cost protection. So instead of buying everything once the market's already gone, if you're buying it incrementally as it's going up, there's a cost protection model there. So the chart on the bottom right there is specifically West Mercia Energy's results, but it gives you an idea as to how flexible works. So the orange there is the market average. So when we do this trading, we do it roughly over a period of about 18 months. And other organisations that do this will do it in a similar way, just with slightly different trading strategy. So how we compare ourselves and go, did we do a good job at the end of the year, is once we get to a point where we're setting our prices, which is actually now for us, we look back over the last 18 months and go, what was the market average of all of those spikes and dips and spikes, versus what was our outturned price. So that is the blue line, the blue bar versus the orange bar there. The 2 grey ones represent the government support schemes. So if you were unfortunate enough to have very expensive energy contracts during those periods, then you may well have had some support from the energy bill relief schemes. We were pleased that actually none of our customers required that. because we were below the market average. So the key benefits of flexible procurement is it is a long-term risk managed strategy. So it's not about jumping year from year as to what is the best strategy today, what's today's price, okay, let's get a refresh next week or next month. It is about a long-term risk managed strategy and buying into that fact. You get the benefits of the economies of scale. So when we are doing this trading, because we have such significant volumes, we are able to negotiate with the suppliers on the framework to minimize their fees. Essentially, with flexible, you are leaving it to the expert. So as opposed to fixed, where you've got to make a decision on a day, and people like yourselves or your CFOs have got to sign a contract to say, today I think is a good day. With this, you sign a contract up front, and then you are leaving it to people like us to do that trading and for us to monitor the markets. And essentially, you can kind of forget about it, safe in the knowledge that you're in a safe pair of hands, and there are experts that are monitoring the market, making informed decisions, adapting quickly to the market conditions, and that's key to the strategy at the moment. There's some big geopolitical things out there that can spook the market and can impact the market. And the big one is you can go to sleep at night and you're not quite sure what's going to be said in the States overnight, and you can wake up in the morning and something has been said that impacts the energy prices. So the strategies can be tailored to suit that. You still get annual budget certainty. So particularly with the WME model, we set an annual capped price from April to March each year. So you still get that budget certainty, and generally you can sign longer contracts, albeit you only have price certainty for 12 months at a time. The negatives of flexible procurement is some versions of it, and not the ones we operate. You have flexible pricing or variable pricing. So you may get a different price each month, and that obviously can be quite hard in terms of budgeting. It is very difficult with flexible to provide rates in advance. So when I have these conversations with people, I reiterate, really, it's all about buying into the strategy and understanding that flexible is a long-term risk managed approach. So for your organizations, it's about buying into that rather than, okay, what's the immediate price? And that can take a bit of time, particularly for finance people to get their heads around. And the last one is it is very difficult to compare prices and strategies between providers. And it's an age-old problem that people have. You can ask us what our price was last year, but our trading strategy will be slightly different to somebody else's. So you're not making a like-for-like comparison. So that is a challenge when it comes to flexible procurement. So that's essentially the two strategies and the two options that you have available to you when it comes to step one, i.e. choosing your procurement strategy. Once you've picked that strategy, the next thing to consider is service levels. So traditionally, you can have a procurement only model, which looks like that triangular agreement there. So that's a very typical, I've used us as an example there, where you have a relationship with a broker potentially, or a PBO like ourselves, and the supplier. And generally what will happen is the one organization will purchase your energy, and then the supply comes directly from the supplier. So your bills go to you from the supplier. And if you have a problem, then you take it up directly with the supplier. And the third party, i.e. the PBO or the broker, has nothing to do with it other than to purchase the energy for you. Or maybe act as an escalation point if you are having issues with the supplier. What we see more and more of, and WME's core offering is a fully managed service, is more and more organisations are providing more service than just energy procurement. And on the right hand side there, I've got some examples of the sort of things that providers may offer as additional services. And it may be that you have to pay, slightly more in terms of your fees, but some of these things you may feel are well worth paying that small addition. So bill validation, WME offer that. So that's where a third party will validate your invoices potentially before you pay them. So it's worth looking at whether you think that will be a benefit, and checking what are the processes and what do they charge. WME's model is quite unique, whereby a school uses their energy, the invoice actually comes to West Mercia Energy and we validate it. And if it passes validation, we actually pay the supplier on behalf of our customers, and then we onward charge to them. And that gives them reassurance that ultimately they only get a bill from us once we are so happy with it that it has already been checked and we've already paid it. But there are various different models of doing bill validation. Customer service. So can you get an organization that has full query management, so you can have a central point of contact for all things energy? So if you've got multiple schools whereby you deal with the suppliers directly, we all know what it's like domestically trying to get hold of suppliers. It can be hard work. Would you benefit, particularly if you are a bigger trust, just from having one central point of contact when it comes to all things energy? And we certainly see a move towards that, particularly in the trusts and the bigger trusts. There are different services then that can be provided. Siteworks, for example, is one of them. So supporting with meter disconnections and relocations and upgrades, etc. So again, it's whether these things are important to you. Will decipher which of these models that you want to go for. Budget support. Some organisations will offer budget support and budget advice at various different times of the year or upon requests, and that's something that we support with. One of the big ones, and Rob's touched on this at the beginning, is decarbonisation and net zero support. So, for example, schools have got to have climate action plans. Can your energy provider help you with things like that? Can they help you with decarbonisation consultancy if you need energy audits, solar PV surveys, etc.? Streamlined energy carbon reports. When you've got to search for these things yourself, ultimately it's one more thing that you've got to do. So can you get that support from your provider? And very heavily linked, and we're going to talk separately about decarbonisation and access to data. The better handle you've got on your energy data, the more informed decisions you can make when it comes to decarbonisation, when it comes to behavioural change on your site. So having access to that data, ideally in one place, not having to go to the British Gas portal for your gas and then the npower portal for your electricity. Can you get that are you getting it, but can you get it in a simpler format as possible that you can understand to help you make these decisions moving forwards? So those are generally the two service options offered in the market. Then we're on to routes to market. So essentially there are three core ways, and almost certainly all of you on the call will adopt one of these. So the first one is through a buying organisation. So, full disclosure, that is what West Mercia Energy are. We are a publicly owned organisation. So some of the benefits or some of the positives of working with a buying organisation is that you tick your compliance box straight away, because you will be purchasing energy through a PCR compliant framework. And this is also the case if you sign into a local authority contract. Ultimately, sitting behind that local authority almost certainly will be a public buying organisation, whether it's WME or one of the others out there. Most of the public buying organisations, if not all, opt for flexible procurement. So that's that risk managed energy procurement strategy. And they will almost all work predominantly, if not solely, with the public sector. So those risk managed strategies are designed and developed specifically for the public sector. Rather than potentially dealing with both the private and the public sector, who may have conflicting appetites for risk. It can be difficult, touching on what I mentioned before on Flex, to compare public buying organisations. And I think we probably are all doing a very, very similar thing when it comes to energy procurement, but there are quite big differentials when it comes to service, linked back to the slides that we've just mentioned. You've then got your TPI, so third party intermediary / broker. So brokers generally, although there is a move more recently to offer a bit more in terms of flexible procurement, generally and typically they offer fixed term, fixed price contracts So they'll offer to do that mini competition for you between a number of suppliers, and they'll go to market on an agreed day, and you will be able to get that price comparison, which may well tick your box in terms of your internal procurement rules. One of the issues potentially when it comes to these fixed prices is volume tolerance. So you may have come across this, but you essentially will have to agree to using a certain amount of kilowatt hours plus or minus a percentage. But if you are to do some really big, particularly if you're to sign, say, a 3 or a 5-year contract, and then you go through, for example, a big decarbonisation plan and your consumption drops by 20 or 30%, it's really important that you check these things before entering in these types of contracts, because you don't want to end up being punished because of that. It raises a question on compliance. So some TPIs or brokers do have ways of offering contracts through frameworks, but most don't. So again, that's something that you've got to satisfy yourselves with. And one of the big challenges in this market is that it is unregulated, and it's very often difficult to tell the difference between a good broker and a poor one that's possibly not looking out for your best interests. Then the third one, and probably the least popular option, is to utilize a supplier directly. So, the good thing here is that you can utilize the price comparison websites that we're all familiar with. And if you know your consumption data and your supply information, they're pretty easy to use to be able to do that. Again, generally that will be fixed term, fixed prices. You will likely save on third-party fees. So, obviously buying organizations and brokers are going to have fees that you will pay. So you may cut out on them, but in the grand scheme of the price of energy, they will be minimal. Service levels will be minimal on this route. And again, it does open up that compliance question as well. So those are the three key routes to market. And then the final one is how to choose a trusted provider, and so once you've decided that you want to do fixed or flex, you've decided that you want fully managed or non-fully managed, and you've decided on your route to market, how do you go about comparing the brokers or the suppliers or the buying organization? So a really simple way to do that is to seek references from your peers. So there is various networks and groups available these days. There's lots of regional school business manager groups and professional networks like the Confederation of Schools Trusts, the Trust Network, ISBL, ASCL, etc. So they are as good a place as any to start in terms of finding a trusted provider, is to speak to speak to your colleagues in other organisations. Are they affiliated with any reputable professional bodies? So West Mercia Energy, I mentioned at the top, is a DFE approved or DFE recommended framework. For a lot of people, that's a really important accreditation. But, are they recommended by the FD Forum, for example, the Finance Directors Forum, or are they affiliated with the Confederation of Schools Trusts, etc.? And these will give you an idea of the types of organisations you're working with, and how seriously potentially they take the education sector as their customer base. It's a cliche, but if it sounds too good to be true, almost certainly it is. So if somebody contacts you, promising you the earth, promising you that they're going to get you the cheapest price ever, and they're going to be far better than your existing provider, then you've probably just met a liar, unfortunately. And again, it comes back to the unregulation of particularly the broker market. So always check and double check the small print if it sounds too good to be true. Linked heavily to that is checking fees. So you should find that any organisation, whether it's a supplier directly, whether it's a TPI or a broker, or whether it's a public buying organisation, should be transparent about what fees they are charging. Nothing frustrates us more than when we see people being ripped off. And I've used the example there. These were actually taken from a broker's terms and conditions, and on the face of it you may look at that and go, well, 0.01 to 0.05 doesn't sound like very much at all, but the reality is that's a penny, and between a penny and 5 pence, and being charged 5p a kilowatt hour is utterly ridiculous. So it's a little trick that some might use to make that look like a very low fee. However, that is a very, very expensive fee for energy procurement, even if you're having a fully managed service. And social value as well. I mean, social value is an important part of public sector contracting. Can you get something for nothing? What initiatives do these organisations provide? And that's a question certainly worth asking. WME, for example, have a social value fund that schools can apply for each year, and they can apply for up to £1,000 from that fund to support environmental initiatives on their site. So we've done a lot of funding of forest schools and redevelopments of that sort of thing over the last 12 months or so. So it's always worth asking that question, because you never know what they might be able to offer. And then just finally on this section, it's kind of our top tips, or my top tips really. On the left-hand side there, in terms of timescales. So in terms of flexible procurement, we advise our customers and people that we talk to put in place a contract between 6 and 12 months in advance. So I appreciate that sounds like a long time, but if you recall how we talked about how flexible procurement works, it's purchasing small amounts of energy over a longer period of time. And ultimately, in our world, the longer the buying window, that minimises risk. In terms of, and also providers will have a closing date on their basket. So for us, for example, entry to our flex basket from April 2026 closes at the end of October this year. So we close that basket 6 months in advance. When it comes to fixed, ultimately there is no deadline. However, you do need to allow a week or so for, if you were to change suppliers, for that process to be managed. What I generally advise is kind of thinking about when you set your budgets. So, if, for example, your contract comes to an end in October this year, you can do fixed right up until, say, September. But if you're setting your budget now, that's not going to be much help. So it may be worth looking ahead of time. And then more generally, don't settle for poor performance. If your supplier's service is poor, if you can't get hold of anybody, that's not acceptable. It should be straightforward to do that. Switching can sound like a very difficult and painful thing to do. It really isn't. Your supplier or your provider, your buying organisation, broker will manage that process for you. Make sure you've got a good handle on your portfolio. So, particularly if you've got multiple schools, make a note of the contracts and the contract end dates, who the suppliers are. And the kind of golden rule there is to make sure that you don't end up in out of contract rates, because they are usually at least double what a normal rate would be. So keeping a good handle on that. And if you do decide to make a switch, that's going to make your life considerably easier. Kind of bullet 3 really you've ticked by being on this webinar. So ensure you understand the different strategies available and pick the one that suits your school and your trust, your risk appetite, and what your requirements are. We're going to touch on data on the next section, but ensure you have easy access to all of your data. It is ultimately your data at the end of the day. So it's really, really important that you have access to that. And we would advise that you select an option that does validate invoices. We failed 30,000 energy invoices last year, so 23-24. So people are quite often surprised how many energy invoices are incorrect. And it might be something simple, like the VAT might be wrong or the rates might be wrong, but it might be something more complex in the non-energy that isn't applied correctly. So that takes us to the end of that section. I'll pause quickly to see if there are any questions. I haven't noticed any. As Rob mentioned, the contact details are provided, so if there are anything that comes up afterwards, happy to take them. So in terms of data and decarbonisation, this stat in the middle there may or may not surprise you, but very, very broadly, as an average, 60% of a school's energy is used when there are no students in the building or when the building is non-operational. So if you are looking at ways to reduce your energy consumption, to reduce your carbon footprint, to reduce your spend on energy, this is a good place to start. It's understanding your baseline understanding when this energy is being used and making changes, whether it's behavioural, whether it's investment, then this is as good a place as any to start. So the importance of data, and this links to metering really. So without going into too much technical detail, there are different ways in which your meters, your energy supply meters, can operate. There is a rollout to make as many of them automated as possible to save the classic, the old school taking pictures or readings of meters. But there's kind of a one level up from that, which ensures that your meter is read every half an hour, all day, every day, and that creates a pattern of your consumption that you can then use to make these decisions. And ultimately, what that does there is makes the invisible visible, and through our platform. So we have our MyWME platform, and there are very different versions of it out there. You can have this information in things like heat maps, which makes it really, really visual and really clear as to when you are using the energy. So, what you don't want to see is the same pattern that you have as a Monday to Friday appearing on a Saturday and a Sunday. The heating should be turned down or potentially turned off, or the lights should be off, etc., when the schools are non-operational. It helps you set targets. It helps you track progress. It helps you make smarter energy decisions. If you are looking at, as I said, energy efficiencies, if you're looking at capital investment on measures, then understanding the data is really, really important. It also supports funding applications, and I think Rob might come back onto that afterwards. So one of the things that we talked about in terms of the fully managed service and potentially what else your energy providers can provide you was technical kind of decarbonisation advice and guidance. So West Mercia Energy, first and foremost, is an energy procurement organisation, and over the last few years, we've been having more and more questions from our education-based customers that, quite frankly, were outside of our remit. I can't come out and do an energy audit. I wouldn't know where to start. So we decided to put something in place whereby we would have this under the WME banner, and we set up the UK's first education-specific education decarbonisation framework, which really pleasingly now is a DFE approved framework as well. And there's a quote there which somewhat embarrassingly is attributed to myself, but the framework essentially provides a simple and compliant route to market for any education establishment in the UK to act as sector-specific decarbonisation experts. And those experts are Barker and Rob and his team, hence the partnership that we have. So the framework gives compliant access to decarbonisation specialists, comprehensive range of low carbon solutions to help you ultimately lower your energy use, carbon emissions and energy costs. Ultimately, WME and the others that we've talked about during this webinar most likely get paid based on how much energy you use. So on one hand, it's counterintuitive, encouraging you to use less energy. However, we think that's what differentiates a good provider to a bad one. We're doing this for the right reasons. What makes this framework different? We touched on it being DFE approved. What is really niche is that it is specifically designed for the education sector. It is single supplier, which ultimately adds to its simplicity to access. So it is a very straightforward process to access, which we'll come on to. In terms of the benefits, it gives you compliance, it provides value for money, and that's all built into the framework. It gives quality assurance and tailored service based on your requirements. What is covered under the framework is essentially the bullet points listed out there on the right hand side. So I won't go into a huge amount of detail because we've touched on them briefly throughout the presentation. Solar PV audits, heat decarbonisation plans, LED audits, condition surveys, funding support, support with climate action plans, etc., etc. So there's a wide range of consultancy available through this framework. And then I think the last slide from me before I hand back to Rob is just in terms of accessing the framework. which is a very simple 6-step process. So you register your interest with West Mercia Energy initially. There's an access agreement which doubles up as a letter of authority. You will then have a discovery meeting with Barker to understand your requirements in more detail. Barker will provide you with a proposal if that first meeting has gone well. At that point, you sign a call off, and Barker will commence the work and deliver the project. So that is the end of my section. I'm very happy to take any questions if there are any. I appreciate there's quite a lot of information there. The slides are quite text heavy deliberately because you will get a copy of them afterwards. But otherwise, I shall hand back to Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. That's fantastic. Yeah, a lot of information there, but really, really helpful and a lot to take away. If you have got some questions as we proceed, then just put them in the chat and we'll hopefully have a few minutes at the end just to wrap up, because I appreciate that, this is quite a complicated area. And I think for us, just as Gavin kind of highlighted on the framework, they were getting lots of inquiries about the technical aspects of energy consultancy and decarbonisation, and we ended up working very closely with Gavin and his team. The same goes for us in the other direction. We're not energy procurement experts. We don't understand the market like these guys do, and yet as we're working with schools and trusts like yourselves on their sustainability journey, obviously part of that journey is about how we buy our energy, and critically, as Gav says, it's about the access to data. So I think the key takeaways that we've seen from working with lots of organisations is, firstly, there is no single right or wrong way of buying your energy. I think it's fair to say that flex is quite typical, but the most important thing is that you can find a trusted provider that is going to give you independent advice, that is giving you a transparent fee model. And the thing we say is, always say is, if you don't understand how your consultant or your provider is being paid, then you need to find out, because they are getting paid. And this idea that we're not getting paid, or don't worry, it's all wrapped up in the cost, is kind of the murky area that we want to try and cut through. And the reputable suppliers will make that transparent and clear to you. They won't be embarrassed to share their fee models, and that's actually where you want to be. Sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable because you see a cost and it's overt and you can measure it, but actually that's where you want to be. You want to understand what you're paying, and then you can benchmark and get best value and be confident that you're making the right decisions. As soon as it's kind of hidden under the carpet, wrapped up in other services, put into a general basket, that's when you kind of lose control of the situation. So working with a trusted supplier that also is going to be on the net zero journey with you is going to give you access to the data, because it's your data. You will be you're paying within your energy supply for that data. It's really important that you're getting access to that, because that is the catalyst to the rest of your decarbonisation journey. And we often get asked about, is there a typical journey to net zero, which is why we put this slide together. And actually, you can see that starting on the kind of left, the idea of getting your data, reviewing energy contracts, and that sort of thing is really the beginning point for a lot of organisations, because it's only when you understand your consumption that you can then start to focus your attention on how to deal with it most effectively. And there are always loads of different things you can do in terms of energy efficiency. So the idea of data is that it enables you to focus that attention on the areas that's going to have the most impact, and ultimately that will lead to doing other programs of work such as energy audits, and then hopefully actual interventions that are going to have an impact on your consumption, which will benefit you from a financial and from a carbon saving point of view. Gavin mentioned this earlier, and I just want to expand on it slightly from Gav's point of view. Making the invisible visible is about measuring your energy consumption from a data perspective, from managing your energy contracts, and even from managing the wider sustainability strategy and journey to net zero for your organisation, for your school, or for your trust. But actually it goes wider than that. And why have we got a picture of scones here? This is actually something that we nicked from Alex Green at Let's Go Zero and her team. But they highlighted the fact that the National Trust, when they did a program of behavioural change and energy efficiency across their huge estate of historic buildings, rather than reporting the impact of that data in kilowatt hours or in tons of carbon, no one knows what a kilowatt hour of energy looks like. What does a ton of carbon look like? So what's really useful with the data is to then translate that into language that your organizations understand, particularly when we're working with schools, working with young people, older people at very different stages in their kind of academic journey. And this example here is what the National Trust did, which is that rather than reporting the cost savings that they were looking to achieve through their energy program, they actually converted that and worked out that it was the equivalent of selling an additional 90,000 scones in their cafes. And that actually starts to put some perspective on it. It starts to get buy-in, so that as your energy procurement strategy and your decarbonisation journey is being rolled out across your organisation, you're looking to get that buy-in. It's finding what are your scones, whether is it TA time, is it resources, is it a new minibus for the school. Putting it in those terms can make the conversation around decarbonisation a lot more accessible and engaging. And if we can move on then to how do you create a sustainability strategy, we quite often get asked about this, where do we start? There's so many things we could be looking at. What's the best approach? And there isn't, as usual, a single sort of solution that works for everybody, but I've just got a couple of slides here that can give you just a sort of framework or a lens to look through this. One is to think about it from a kind of what we say the measure, plan and act stage. So again, going back to our data, it's measuring where you are on the journey, looking at your metering and your energy audits, collecting some data that's going to help you to make this data-driven decisions on what you can do in what order and what's going to have the most impact. Then start to plan out your actions through a net zero strategy, through working with partners who are experts in this area to help you to put budget costs against particular interventions and looking at what the return on investment might be from both a cost and a carbon saving, and then critically moving those plans into action, actually implementing them, because with all the planning in the world, it will only actually make any changes if you actually implement it. So that's one sort of way of looking at it. The other, even slightly simpler version that I quite like to look at, which is the sort of two approaches we often see when we're working with trusts on their sustainability strategies and net zero journey, is the planners and the just do it. So that's what this slide is all about. And again, there's not a right or wrong way of doing it. I've actually got a couple of case studies here I'm going to share with you just to show you. But some people like to have all their ducks in a row. They like to collect all the data, write a strategy, plan it all out. Other people are just like, oh, I just want to get on with something. I've got a project here, let's just do it. And actually, they're both quite effective. I think the most important thing is if you do decide to go down the strategic approach, which is great because it is kind of the thorough, comprehensive and ultimately most efficient way of doing it, as long as you don't get stuck in that strategy and planning stage, because as I mentioned earlier, there's no point having a strategy if you don't implement it. And that's when the sort of just do it approach is quite useful. The way you might think about going ahead with this in a more wide context is to have a look at our sustainability self-assessment tool, and the link will be in the post-event notes that you'll get, and there's a QR code on there as well. We've put together a little self-assessment checklist. It takes sort of 5 to 10 minutes to complete. It takes you through a series of questions, going from the very high-level strategic piece through to data, through to more practical implementations of what you can do across sustainability in schools, and that can form the basis of an action plan for you. And there are other resources that's then linked to, and links to partners such as Let's Go Zero, Count Your Carbon, which is a free carbon footprinting tool for schools, template documents for sustainability strategies, and all that sort of thing, which can be really helpful. So if you're, starting with your energy procurement as the beginning of your journey, this can help you to just sort of look at how that can be carried on further. And as I said, a couple of examples of how this has been worked. Greenwood Academy Trust we worked with on looking at this is the sort of strategy approach, going back to chessboard image back on a couple of slides ago. They wanted to have a strategy. We did energy audits. We looked at their assets. We looked at condition. We assessed their consumption patterns, and they looked at their half-hourly data, and then assessed a range of projects that they could conduct, looked at their funding, created budget costs, looked at return on investment, and created a roadmap for them across their 30-odd schools to say what we're going to do next. And we did them as coordinated programs. So the first column on the left-hand side that's green there is the data piece, where we went round, looked at half-hourly data across electricity, gas, made sure they had a really good handle on their data. That then informed a program of LED lighting and renewable energy through solar and PV, which is actually now moved on and is virtually complete, but those orange ones are the ones that we're working on. And then the white columns were the other options that we'd identified as future activity that can help them on that journey. So that's a strategic approach. Here's an example of a PV array that we put on one of their secondary schools, and is now having a huge impact. Saved over £170,000 return on investment in under 4 years, and saving 82 tonnes of carbon per year for the next 25 years. The other way of looking at it is what Windsor Academy Trust did. We supported them with some grant funding applications and got some, they were quite fortunate in timing, but we managed to secure them quite a lot of money to do some projects. And so they were just like, let's just follow the money, get whatever we can, and hit our schools with projects. So we've done LED lighting, fabric improvements, insulation. We're now moving into a program of low carbon heating. You'll see the bottom left image there is some heat pumps on one of their schools. We're now starting to put a little bit of battery storage and some EV charging across their estate. So there is, and the impact that that's had on their decarbonisation journey is really marked. You can see the graph here with the red line at the top showing the general trajectory towards our national objective and government objective of net zero by 2050, and the orange line is Windsor Academy Trust's objective of hitting that by 2030, which scarily enough is about less than 300 weeks away, if you want to put it in those terms. And you can see the bar chart of how we're doing against that. Those interventions, we're actually measuring that progress and using data to both inform our action plan, but also to communicate and measure and monitor the successes that they've had already. And ultimately, when we've looked at this, having done hundreds of energy audits across many schools and trusts up and down the country, these are the priority areas: metering, LED lighting, heating controls, and solar. So if you fancy going down the project first approach and just want to get on with things, these are the ones that will have the biggest bang for your buck. And within 2 or 3 years, you can potentially take 50% out of your energy costs through a coordinated program of this, and then move on to some of the other areas that can be a bit stickier because they're large capital projects that might involve work to the envelope of the building through fabric upgrades, things like low carbon heating, which save a lot of carbon but actually don't have the financial return. These are really powerful because they're creating that financial headroom to then move on and do other things within your net zero journey. So I hope that was useful. We're coming to the end of our time. That was a summary. Obviously, we've got a bit of time for some questions, and Gavin's still on the call if you've got any queries on your energy procurement. But we know, having done this in the past, people quite often like to talk about their personal circumstances of their own schools and trusts, in a more kind of one-to-one environment. So if you would like to discuss your energy procurement with Gav and his team, then just reach out. We've got all of that contact details, and you'll have the slides and the recording of today's session shared with you shortly. And similarly, if you want to talk about the wider journey in terms of implementation of some of the low energy and energy efficiency projects and creating sustainability strategies, taking the self-assessment, then please follow up on some of those links that we put in the chat. So I'll just prompt last sort of call for any questions. I don't think there's anything come up on the chat here. However, if there is anything, then please shout now or raise your hand and we can take you off mute and you can ask Gab or myself any questions around this. Otherwise, I'd say, please visit both the websites as well, because we've got lots of resources, links to other partners. As I say, we work closely with CST, with Let's Go Zero, with the DFE, on all of these things. And so hopefully you can find some support, because there is a lot of support out there, and it's just about trying to find the right partners to take you on that journey. So I hope this was useful, and if there's nothing else, I will just close off with the final slide, just with all our contact details, but you'll have these on the notes. Thank you for joining today, and we hope to speak to you again at another event very soon.